There's lots of times that people say to me, oh, I didn't hit my head. But it's irrelevant. If you're going, 60 kilometers an hour and all of a sudden your head jostles back and forth in your brain, there's an injury there. So helmets are important. Absolutely. I'm a proponent of helmets, but I would say I would say maybe in some sports that has given people a false sense of security. And, I watch the NFL players, the linebackers, take those massive hits that you can hear, just shot, that they always play on the replay. Oh, that was a big hit. And you just think, wow, what is going on inside your skull right now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a common mistake that parents make. I have seen more parents buy a 50-cent helmet to protect $1 million head, so to speak, and it doesn't fit, or they'll go and grab a Barbie plastic helmet that you used for a child when they were a little kid,
right,
riding a tricycle, and that becomes their bike helmet,
right,
and it is. I mean, it's the kind of thing where if you got hit with it, even if it was a 10-mile-an-hour impact, it really would protect nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right. I think one of the mistakes that I see happening in both the NFL and the NHL is the fact that the guys are wearing equipment now that it's like a gladiator. It's like, I'm impervious to pain, and so on you makes you feel like you can just obliterate somebody. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you don't think about, well, I'm not going to get hurt, so why would it matter? And, I know I may sound old-fashioned, but I think you should go back to soft pads when it comes to shoulder pads and elbow pads with enough protection that you wouldn't get hurt, because you would think twice before you would plaster somebody.
Yeah.
If you had soft pads, because it's your shoulder now that's going to get hurt as well. And I think that would change the game.
It's funny you said that, because I have a brother-in-law who's from New Zealand and plays rugby. And he tells me all the time, he watches hockey and he just says, I'm not going to let my son play rugby either, probably, but he tells me all the time that rugby is much safer because of that, because they're not wearing the gear, and because when they hit each other, it hurts.
Yeah.
So,
you respect human life.
Yeah, I respect the brain. It's funny, you spend a lot of time studying the brain, and you spend a lot of time, like I have, working with people with all sorts of injuries or diseases to the brain, and you realize how phenomenally important the brain is. And once you realize how important it is, it really makes you have some respect for it.
Yeah.
And I think, people talk a lot about prevention and helmets and that sort of thing. And it sounds cliche, but really, I think for prevention, the key is education and helping people to understand how critical the brain is and how critical it is not to overlook injuries.
Yeah. And I think, Dr. Kincade, in many cases, it's not only just the education, but it's being realistic about things that no longer exist that you would say, okay, how has this changed us? And this whole show was about training to change. And part of the reason why I chose that was because I was thinking of this, the largest hockey league in the world no longer exists. And it no longer exists, and I think this has the major reason why this is happening more in hockey. And that is what I call the outdoor hockey experience of what I grew up with. You went out and you went to the Thorncliffe outdoor arenas. There were 4 of them in Thorncliffe. I lived in Thorncliffe. And there were 4 of them. And you went out there and you played with 50 or 60 guys in age from 6 to 26. And I must say, in the 60s, you didn't wear helmets. I mean, that was a sad thing to say. There were very few kids wearing helmets, but you didn't wear equipment either. And it was a shinny game, and you understood the respect for human life. You understood and if you ever got out of control, or if some guy, let's say a 12-year-old decided to show off, or a 14-year-old, and he took a little kid out, somebody went over there and policed him and said, hey, you're off. Get off the ice. And you did that. And I think that in many respects, when it comes to hockey, we've lost that respect because we've tried to, and I appreciate what you're saying about education, but we've taken hitting out of hockey, and we say, okay, now we're going to do it when we're 12 and 13, and the body's finally ready. I train 12, 13-year-olds. I've got kids that are 75 pounds and 145 pounds at 12 years of age. And all of a sudden, to introduce hitting to them then is way too late. I think when you do it as a 5 and 6 year old, and I know there are parents out there that think I'm crazy, but when you do it at 5 or 6, they run into each other. They fall down. They have a natural progression towards that, and they learn respect for themselves and for each other. And I think that there is some real education that needs to go on there for this to stop and for it to change.
Yeah. Yes, I can see that, learning about hitting earlier might help in some ways. I also think, this idea that if you wait until 12 or 13, then the brain is no longer vulnerable because it's not developing is completely not understanding what's happening in the brain.
I mean, I'm not an expert, so I refer to you because I understand that. But.
No. In fact, it's just something that a lot of people don't understand and know about the brain is that it goes through 2 major developmental stages. One is when they're very young, up until 5, where the brain is really growing and developing. But there's a second wave of brain development that happens during the teen years that is a very critical time. So, starting to have hitting there while the brain is still, in my opinion, very vulnerable, that's not necessarily a safe time either.
Mm-hmm. How late is that? From what age? Some 5 to...
Well, up until from birth until about 5, there's a lot of rapid development going on, and then starting again in the preteen years, about 11 or 12, there's a second wave of development, and involves more specialization, especially of the front part of the brain. So the front part of the brain, which is our most complex part of the brain, it controls things like judgment, problem solving, reasoning, planning, organization, which probably explains a lot to you about anybody who has teenagers. You see some of the behavior that's going on there. But those kinds of structures are being developed during that phase. And really, the research is showing now that development is continuing up until people are probably about 25.
Wow.
Very interesting.
Lisa's waving at me. We're way overboard. We're over time here. We have to get out. She's Dr. Michelle Kincade. She gave her time today and came down here. And we don't get very many in-studio guests, so we've only had 4, I think, or 5, so we're really privileged to have you, and we appreciate you coming and being here and taking on this valuable topic, concussions and brain injuries. And you can email us, jungle.jim@shaw.ca or fan960@rci.rogers.com. If they want to find you or talk to you, how do they get a hold of you?
They can check my website, and the website is evolvepsychology.ca, or they can call my office, which is 403-245-5111.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for letting us go overboard, but it was a great topic, great thing to have. We'll come back and we'll wrap up the show right after this. You're listening to the Jungle Jim Hunter Show on Sportsnet Radio, the Fan 960 at fan960.com.